Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's good, and hope everybody can hear me okay. I've got the live transcription on, so if that helps everybody to hear what's going on. So I wanted to get started, and if you can't hear me, just let me know. Just sort of shout out or send me something in the chat box. I did want to mention, and I noticed I mentioned in my my announcements yesterday to the class in Brightspace that everybody should put their name when they log into Zoom so that I can record attendance. Basically downloads it to an Excel file and I record attendance that way. But some people will have something like, whether somebody has iPad, well, that doesn't tell me, excuse me, who you are. So if you could do that, just put your name in, first and last name if you would. I'd appreciate it. Right now I know there are people with their first names in. That's fine, I could probably find out who you are, but there may be more than one, John or whatever. If you would do that, I know that seems like sort of an optional thing when you're doing a Zoom with people you know, or even at work or whatever. But in this case, I'm trying to actually record attendance, and it actually downloads it to a spreadsheet, and all I see is somebody's name, like cell iPhone or something like that. So, and of course, you can look at this if you go through an iPhone. We sort of encourage the class activities in Brightspace to be done either on a computer or on a tablet, but probably a computer is the best. So that's the first thing is to make sure that we have your attendance recorded that way. The other thing I wanted to note, and I want to make sure everyone has got their microphones muted. It looks like everyone's muted now. I know that last week there were a couple of students who had said that, hey, I'm not really hearing things, that things are cutting out. And I don't know. I sort of talked this over a bit with our audiovisual people, and they said, well, it could be the connection, it could be the place where you are, it could be all kinds of different things. If you're on a wireless connection, sometimes they cut out, obviously, or any kind of connection for that matter. But also this, the sound. It looks like, excuse me, looks like everyone is muted, and that's good. Participate. If you do have a question, just chime in, and then just ask what your question is, or have a comment or whatever. It's this is not something to be overly formal, and but just make sure you go back to mute so that we are able to have a good audio sound. Okay, so that's one thing. Another final announcement I want to make before we get started is I was looking. I had recorded the grades for the week one discussion, and I think there may be some confusion as to what is to be done. And I want to make sure that everyone is clear on what the requirements are for the week's discussion activities. Every week in the class, there's going to be a discussion activity with 15 weeks in the course. And I'll post the topic of the discussion. And what you'll do is make an initial reply by day 4 of that week. Now, I know in week 2, that would have been Friday, but I think every other week, with the exception of maybe Thanksgiving week, it'll be a Thursday. So just to be thinking of Thursday, make your initial reply. And as I mentioned on day 1 of the class, there's a bit of logic behind that. And that is that you would read, the material for the first 3 days just to sort of get acclimated. I know the textbook is not the most appropriate for this class. I understand that, but it's one that will give you some background. It's a little more technical than what we're seeing. And if you've noticed from the first quiz, the first quiz was not as complex and graphical and mathematical as the textbook appears to be. But those first 3 days give you a chance to sort of read the material, make your post on the 4th day, and then work on the quiz or the exam, whichever you prefer, in that last half of the week. So that's sort of the logic of that. So you want to make another post sometime before the end of the week. Now you can make a post to some other participant, whether it's me or some other participant. You can do it on Monday if you like. If somebody's already posted, I know a lot of times we don't get people starting in the post until about Wednesday, Thursday, which is fine. But you don't have to. You don't have to wait. You can post whenever whenever you like. Okay, so post whenever you like, and but it has to be one other day than the original post day. So you should have 2 days of participation in the discussions itself. It's a requirement for the class. I know some people haven't done it. So what I'm going to do is, I know this is a wonderful class. I know a lot of you are new here, so maybe new to online courses. So what you want to do, I'll give you a bit of an amnesty, I guess. So for the first for weeks 1 and weeks 2, if you have not made follow-up posts, please do so, but do so by this Sunday. Sunday's the end of week 3, and really it's a requirement that it should have been done, while the course was going on. But if there's confusion, you've got that opportunity to do that. So make sure you read the syllabus, okay? Make sure you follow along with what's going on. If you don't know what's happening in the course, by all means, reach out to me, give me a call, send me an email, whatever you think is most appropriate. And I'll get back to you as soon as I'm able, and we'll resolve any of those issues. So anyway, for the first 2 weeks, just go in, and if you need to do some follow-up, please do. Some of you who have made your requirements for that, and I haven't looked at week 2 yet because it just ended, but for those of you who've already done that, then obviously you don't need to do anything additional. So, okay, some questions about that and what's happening there. Okay, well, what I wanted to do, we're pretty much on track with where I think we need to be for the, based on the syllabus. There's one topic I've got left to cover last week. Last week's sort of overall topic was production and consumption. Production and consumption. And we talked about this idea of how, who does the production. We had the circular flow model of who's who, and I do it on this board here. And I'm going to go over there this idea of inputs and outputs, because it really is sort of a basic idea of what's going on in economics. And so let me do this. And this is going to be an extremely basic. I'm ahead of myself because I'm going to pick up the output model here in a minute. But if you think about what economic systems basically are, it's about producers gathering together all of these various inputs, whether it's things like labor, whether it's things like materials, or energy, or even financial resources, right? Financial resources. And gathering all these together and sort of running them together through the hopper, what we would call production. And the production is handled at the level of the firm, right? And out the other end come these nice shiny boxes that we call outputs, okay? And all these guys here are inputs. All those are inputs and outputs. Now, this is not a particularly brilliant model of economics. I mean, I know it's a fairly rudimentary flow chart, but what it's really trying to illustrate is the idea that one of the basic actors in the circular flow model is that of the business firm, particularly post-industrial revolution, where we've got people leaving home to go to work, usually at some sort of business firm. I know there are governmental employers. I get that. There are not-for-profit employers. I understand that. I understand there are people who are self-employed. But for the most part, but if you're self-employed, you are your own firm. But you're gathering together all of these things, all of these inputs, and on the other side are outputs. And those are all the things that we value in the economy that we put a dollar figure on. And as we get deeper into the course, we're going to talk about how we put dollar figures on these, how we value these, because we can value these, we can value the cost of labor, the cost of materials, financial resources, all of this, and we can value the outputs. And hopefully, I mean, if the management and the calculations are correct, the value of the outputs should exceed the value of the inputs. Otherwise, what's the purpose of producing output? And we're going to make the case that business firms, remember what was one of the definitions of business firms from last time was for profit, right? That they exist to make a profit. And that's their number one objective. And for those of you who go on to take microeconomics, I think you'll probably hear that quite a lot. It'll tell, we'll tell a lot about the idea that business firms exist to make a profit, to make a return for their owners. And by so doing, they actually help to aid the economic growth of the economy. So there are a lot of those considerations going on. Okay, so that's essentially what's going on with inputs and outputs. And this is not necessarily a graph you find in your book or anywhere else. I'm just sort of trying to lay out in sort of quick and dirty terms what we're talking about here. But what is talked about in your book is something called the production possibilities model. And let's talk a bit about what that is, production possibilities. So, and there are a number of different concepts that we're going to be talking about here. with regard to this model. Now, first of all, when we talk about model, I mentioned it a bit last time when we began our very first model of discussion in this class, and that was the circular flow model. And I said, okay, so what's a model? We've all heard the term model before, but what is it? Well, I think most of us know it's a simulation, it's a representation, it's a depiction of reality. But I like the simulation aspect because it can allow us to also determine what might happen if, and that's a lot of what economists do, is determine what if. And a lot of our jobs are to try to determine what will happen, either in the macro realm, like what will happen in the economy if Congress approves a tax cut, or if the Federal Reserve raises interest rates. And if those of you may even just in a passing way follow the news, you know that interest rates are rising because inflation is rising. And so inflation is really beginning to be something that is sort of taking hold. And so that's a big story. So the what if would be, what if the Federal Reserve, our nation's central bank, raises interest rates, then what? So that's what's going on right now in terms of the modeling for what's happening. Well, in modeling in more of a micro capacity is what will happen if we change the inputs of the firm and therefore we change the outputs. And so what we're talking about here, the production possibilities model, is this. We're going to take this sort of graph, it looks like that, where we've got an origin here. I think most of us have seen this in some incarnation before. It's basically a Cartesian graph, but we're only going to be working in the first quadrant, not the second, third, and fourth quadrants. And we're going to be taking the model, a very, very simple model of production, and we're going to assume that there is some production system. What do I mean by that? It could be an individual business firm. It could be an individual unit within a business firm. It could be an industry itself. It could be an entire economy, whatever the case might be. But we're going to say that there are only two outputs being produced, good A and good B. Good A and good B, and it doesn't really matter what those goods are. I know that sometimes what's been used in the past is guns and butter, and we may sort of use that a bit. I know it's used a lot in the social sciences to sort of talk about alternatives. And I want to address at the outset one seeming weakness of this particular model, and that is this objection that people raise over time, and it's a good one, and it is, well, hey, what do you mean by two goods? I mean, what kind of economy only produces two goods? Even the most primitive of economies produce more than two goods, don't they? And I think the answer to that is yes, they probably do. But that's not so much the point. And if, in fact, we wanted to take every good that an economy could produce, we could just reproduce graphs across the board, around the room, on the ceiling. But we'd still end up with the same sorts of ideas as to what's being presented. So what models allow us to do is to sort of simplify the analysis so that we can sort of boil down what is the real essence of what we're trying to communicate. Okay, so as we go out on this axis, we produce more of good A. As we go on this axis, we produce more of good B. And the question is, how do we do it given the fact that whatever our inputs are constrained, at least in the short run? That is, we've only got so many workers, we've only got so much financial resources, we've only got so much space in order to operate where we can store materials and inventory and whatnot. We've only got so many trucks to move the merchandise, and so we are constrained. And so we're constrained by a limit that looks something like this curve. And that curve we often refer to as the production possibilities frontier. So a PPF curve. And that curve is a constraint that limits our ability to go beyond that, at least in the short run. And we sort of define the short run in economics as a period in which you really that's that easily. And over the long run, all these inputs can be changed. And in the long run, everything pretty much does change. But for the short run analysis, we're sort of constrained. Okay, so we're constrained by that limit line. So what does it mean? Well, it means if we're operating somewhere on that, we're pushing ourselves to the very limit here, we can produce some kind of combination of production. Some combination of good A we'll call A sub 1, and some combination of B we'll call B sub 1. And that is, we'll produce some quantity of A and some quantity of B in some combination. But remember, we have only two outputs, and these are both these axes are outputs. The inputs are not specified here, but it doesn't really make any difference. We know that we're limited with whatever they are, they're sort of given. Okay. So what does this production possibilities model tell us? It tells us that if we want to change the inputs somehow, or change the outputs, then let's say we want to produce more A. We want to produce more A, and so as a result, we get more A, but we do so at the expense of producing some good B. And so as a result, we have a trade-off. So a trade-off exists. And that is, if I want to produce more good A, I've got to give up some of the production of good B, because I can't do both. I can't do A2 and B1. It doesn't exist. That is, I can't do everything. And an important concept everywhere in economics. It even applies to individuals. It applies to labor economics, and that is the idea that nobody can do everything, right? In fact, what you might want to do is to focus on those things which you get the best value for. And in fact, why might we want to produce more good A and less good B? Maybe good B is shampoo and good A is conditioner, and we maybe make more money producing shampoo than we do conditioner. So let's produce more shampoo and less conditioner because it earns us more. So let's do that. Or maybe we're more efficient at producing good B than good A. It costs less to do it, which is really the same bottom line result. We make more money. So let's focus on that. Oh, I got these axes wrong. They should be B1, B2. I'm sorry. I get my axes. It should be B. So it should be. I apologize. That's kind of embarrassing, isn't it? So we started at A1, B. Wait a minute. We started at A1, B1. Sorry about that. I wish somebody would have told me that. So, and if we want to do more B, we go to B2 and fall back to A2. My bad. I apologize. In other words, we're moving this way along the line. So I didn't realize that until I was started looking at that. I thought, wait, this is kind of weird. Anyway, the A axis refers A1 and A2, B. So it's the bottom line result. If we earn more by making more of good B, we do that. Or if it costs us less to produce good B, we do that. So there are all kinds of reasons. And the point I was making about individuals was, if it's more if it's more rewarding for us to, I don't know, go to law school and become a lawyer than it is for us to become a baseball player, then maybe we should become a lawyer. However, and I know that we used to have a textbook that talked about people who skip school altogether go straight to becoming a pro athlete. The argument was that they made the rational decision. So LeBron James did not go to college. Instead, he went straight to professional basketball. And how did that work out for him? I think probably pretty well. Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard to go to start a software company, and that worked out for them. So they made the decision of doing more of one thing, less of another, even if it means doing less of something else. So a trade-off exists. This idea of trade-offs is everywhere in economics. And it has to do also with scarcity. And that's something we talked about in week 1 of the class. That scarcity exists, it's all around us. And in fact, this is the whole idea of the economizing problem. We wouldn't have economics if there weren't scarcity. If things were abundant to us, we could do it all, we could have it all, we could have access to it all, then none of this would make any difference. But we don't, so as a result, we've got to make choices. And so the choice here is to make more of good B and less of good A. So a trade-off exists. Now, what's missing from this is dollar figures, right? Or how we put value, how we assign value to these outputs. And so we do it in terms of dollar figures. And so the value here, we must have some sort of value. And so the value of the trade-off, that is the giving up of good A in order to produce more good B, is known as the opportunity cost. And that may be a term that you've now come across in the book, hopefully, or it may be a term that you're familiar with from some previous experience. Opportunity cost. And so what is the opportunity cost? The opportunity cost is simply defined as the value of a foregone alternative. The value of a foregone alternative is the opportunity cost. I do one thing and I give up something else in order to do that. So scroll down there a little bit so you can see that. And I apologize that actually, if I sort of widen out, I kind of got a little trade-off here between widening out and allowing you to see everything. So So a trade-off exists, the value of which is the opportunity cost. And the opportunity cost is simply the value of a foregone alternative. Whatever we choose not to do, we have to take into consideration in terms of what we gave up. Because we can't do A1 and B2. We have to give up something in order to do that. So there's a trade-off going on there. Now here's the question that arises all the time in production possibilities. And that is, okay, what if we produce more of good B, less of good A, or we're going to see this trade-off accelerating over time, because as this curve, as it approaches the vertical, it becomes more horizontal. As it approaches the horizontal, it becomes more vertical. In other words, these trade-offs are speeding up. They're accelerating. We call it increasing opportunity cost. The concept of increasing opportunity cost. Okay, so we are constrained, particularly in the short run. And I know I keep talking about this difference between the short run and the long run. And all we're really talking about here from a short run perspective is simply this idea that we're constrained, we're limited in what we can do. It's just like right now, if you're in college, you may not be able to earn a really high salary simply because you're gaining the skills, you're trying to acquire the skills. And as you gain those skills, at some point you will come out and in the long run, be able to earn a much, much higher income than what you may be earning now. Maybe you're earning nothing now, right? Which is not very uncommon at all. But you're gaining the skills. And so in the long run, things will pay off. But what are you giving up in the short run? You're giving up whatever you do to give up in order to attend class is perhaps working. And I know econ professors for decades have asked this question of students, what are you giving up to be here right now? And it could be wages, it could be sleep, it could be, hanging out by the pool. It could be whatever, you could be doing, but that you're doing now. So why are you doing this? Well, hopefully you're making what I think is a very rational long-term connection, because it's an investment in what is a long-term value proposition. Yes, there's a short-run trade-off, but that short-run trade-off has to be accounted for. But in the long run, we're going to say that it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then you'll make that determination for yourself. Now, here's one thing. This will be the last point I want to make about this, because I know your book goes into quite a bit on this, and it's in similar fashion to what I talked about last week with regard to the circular flow model. That if you were to Google this, you'd find all kinds of examples and go on and on and on with this whole idea of increasing opportunity cost and all that. And I don't want to take it beyond. I don't want to take the complexity beyond what we're doing here in this class. But you're free to obviously look. I can't tell you not to go sort of look around and see what's out there on the internet. But I do want to make one final point. That is this. Okay, I keep talking about the short run here, right? So we've got good A, right? On this axis here, good A. And I'll try to remember what axis is which, right? Good A and good B on either axis. And we are constrained in the short run. So we've got this concave downward. By the way, this downward slope is important, because what it really reflects is the fact that as one thing goes, if you're on an axis like this, on a plane like this, as one thing goes up, the other thing goes down. That's what a negative slope refers to. One thing goes up, the other thing goes down. And if the other thing goes down, then the other thing goes back up. That's what a negative slope really refers to. Okay, so where's the long run here? So if we're stuck in the short run and we're producing some combination of outputs, A1, B1, making sure that I've got my axes right, A1, B1, right? And the thing is, well, maybe I'm not satisfied with simply producing more of good B, even though I have to, because I have to give up some of good A and whatnot. And so what is the alternative? Whether it's a firm, whether it's an entire industry, let's say it's the shoe industry or the apparel industry or whatever, or maybe it's an entire economy. Maybe it's an entire economy. And what are these trade-offs? Because we're stuck in the short run with trade-offs. And by the way, I want to come back to something I talked about a few minutes ago. That was the idea of this, I guess, criticism at first glance that may say, what kind of economy produces only two goods? Even the most underdeveloped economy produces more than two outputs. And that's true. But there are very often questions, particularly in the sort of the macro realm, where if we do more of one thing, we give up something of another. And I know some economists over many years have said one of the reasons why America, practically alone among the industrial countries, does not have some sort of organized national healthcare system where everybody has access to healthcare, regardless of their insurance status, because there is no health insurance. It's all government run. It's Medicare for all. We know Medicare exists as health insurance for seniors, primarily for seniors, but it doesn't exist for pretty much anyone else, right? And most other countries have a system like that. And one of the conclusions that some make is it's because we have such a large defense budget. We have a gargantuan amount of money we spend on defense. that we simply can't afford it. Now, not everyone buys that, and I want to make clear that, as I said on the first day of class, that there are a lot of conclusions that economists make that others don't agree with. That's fine. But it's the idea that if we do more of one thing, like defense spending, we have to give up something of something else like healthcare spending. Healthcare itself is a complicated subject, so it's difficult to say, whether that's a true conclusion or not, but it's the idea. I know that one of the best examples that I heard in terms of trade-offs was during the Iraq War. Early on, it was a very expensive proposition, and I saw an interview with the mayor of Philadelphia, who had said, and I trust him that his numbers are right, but he said, one day spending in our Iraq War could have completely rebuilt public housing in Philadelphia. So that's a trade-off. We do more of this. We can't do something of the other because in the short run, we're constrained on what we can do. That was one of the better examples that I heard as to what the trade-offs are. Some of these immediate trade-offs. So it's not just at the individual firm level. It's not just the individual worker level. It can also be at the entire macro level. But here's the good news, and it really is, I think, good news. Even though we're constrained by this sort of production line, this production possibilities frontier, what if we're able to sort of push this outward? That is, we're transitioning from the short run to the long run, and so now we're going in this direction. In other words, we're pushing outward, we're producing more, and now we're producing more of all outputs. We're producing more of good A and more of good B, more A, more all, and more good B. And so as a result, what is going on here? Well, simply put, this is simply the phenomenon of economic growth. The phenomenon of economic growth, and that is the ability to produce more outputs. Obviously, we are now moving from the short run to the long run. So we've got more inputs because more people are entering the labor force as our population grows. That's one of the things that we notice over time as our population grows, our output grows. And if you go back to, and by the way, the evidence of this is good. If you go back to, say, 1980, when the population of the United States was about 200 million people, our output in the US economy was about $3 trillion, something like that. So just to kind of give you an idea, and these are very definitely rounded figures here. So the population, about 200 million people, and the total output of goods and services was about $3 trillion. That's 3 with 12 zeros, okay? And if you go forward to about 2020, we're a little over 300 million. It's about 330, something like that. I'm really wildly rounding, but it's about a 50% increase in population. And yet we were producing somewhere around $21 trillion in output. Now, this is good news if you consider the fact that, look, the population has only gone up by 100 million. That's 50% increase in population. But we've had a 700% increase in total output in the economy. We've gone from 3 trillion to $21 trillion. I know we've got to factor in inflation here somewhat, and it's a bit of a complicating factor, but it's not that big of a complicating factor. The economy has grown a lot faster than the population. So economic growth is possible, and we all know that the economy has grown faster, particularly those of us who are a little older. We've seen the economy grow faster. And this goes to a lot of questions about what we as an economy can do. I personally believe that the stimulus checks that we all got, most of us got over the last couple of years, probably would not have been affordable back in 1980 if we'd had a pandemic like what we had. I don't think the US economy probably absorbed that easily. And in fact, I think that there's a lot of evidence that the inflation we're seeing now was due to the fact that the government was stepping on the gas so hard with stimulus and with very low interest rates and whatnot. And all of that has now reversed itself. Interest rates are going up and the stimulus is gone. And for some people, particularly in the higher end, their taxes have gone up. But the point I'm making is that with a bigger economy, flexibility, particularly when your population is not as large. And that population figure includes everybody. So we're not really interested in saying that, who's a citizen and who's not. It's just whoever's here, whoever's in our workforce. We don't tend to, discriminate based upon, nationality or whatnot, whether someone is a citizen or not. If they're here, they're part of our economy. We capture their output. So population has only gone up by this amount, and the economic growth is there, meaning we've got more of everything. And I have made the case to students for a very long time that the Industrial Revolution, which began somewhere around 200 years ago, and we're going to talk much more about that as we get into sort of the economic history piece, but the Industrial Revolution was a radical thing to happen, and that it has changed our lives mostly for the better, maybe in some ways not for the better, but mostly for the better. It's allowed us to have a longer lifespan, a better standard of living. All of these kinds of things are possible because of economic growth, which is one reason why economists will say, what is the objective of macro policy? Excuse me. What is the objective of economic policy? And the objective is to achieve growth, economic growth over time. And there's usually a caveat in there that says growth without inflation. I think that's really sort of the caveat that needs to be included. So growth without inflation is really the goal. Now, obviously, we have our share of inflation. It's higher now than what it's been in the last 40 years. And so we'll talk a bit more about that. As I mentioned on the first week of class, I deliberately made some space for those last 3 weeks of the semester so that we can cover anything that we didn't get to. The events, and I think inflation is definitely a current event that we could talk about. And also, if we're running a bit behind, it gives us a chance to do that as well. Okay, so questions about that before we sort of push into supply and demand and go into that whole issue there. Feel free to hit me in the chat box if you like. There's no reason why you shouldn't feel free to do that if you like. And I'm going to try to zero in here for you. And hopefully if it's easier to see, I'm going to try to mute the lights a little bit. I'll bring it back up here in a minute when I get into doing a little more with the whiteboard. But let me see. Oh, that's maybe too dark. Let me see. That might be good. So let's talk about supply and demand. And this now covers, or is covered in chapter 3 in your book, and is a pretty good chapter. It's not overly complex. It also, this topic mirrors what the discussion activity for the week is. And in this week's discussion activity, which you want to make your initial reply to no later than tomorrow, you're just simply asked what could cause the demand or the supply of something to change, and something non-price related. So what could cause the change? And we'll get into those factors here. And so if you haven't done that activity yet, this will give you a chance to, want to do, houses, or I want to do the demand for the supply of lumber or whatever. So, it give you an idea to sort of think ahead. So supply and demand, let's talk about what this is about. This is pretty fundamental. As I mentioned in my lead up to the discussion activity, it's, we've all heard this term supply and demand forever, in all kinds of different contexts. And most of the times, I think we sort of instinctively know, just being alive and living in a market economy, that, what these relationships pretty much are. We're going to get drill down a little bit deeper into it, but I think we pretty much know what they are. I mean, if the price of Super Bowl tickets is, I don't know, $2,000, then people say, well, why is the price of Super Bowl tickets $2,000? And somebody would say, well, it's supply and demand. And usually that answer suffices to tell us, okay, well, that makes sense. All right, there's a limited supply and a huge demand. So, the price is going to go up. And so those who aren't willing and able to pay $2,000 for a seat are going to get crowded out. They're going to get pushed out. And I don't know whether or not Super Bowl tickets go for they probably are all over the place. But I'm just sort of making an example there. If something is scarce and has values, people are willing to pay up for it. We've all come across these relationships before. I think we're all sort of familiar with them. It is part of the human condition. But I want to sort of talk about these from a more formal sort of academic standpoint. And let's take demand first. Even though I think in everyday speech, we all use the term supply and demand a lot, economists tend to focus on demand first. And I think there's a reason why it's maybe a chicken and egg kind of question, really. And that is, and by the way, there's no one answer to it. In fact, there's no one answer to a lot of the questions that we've got in economics. In fact, I think as you see as we go through the class, our discussion activities are going to have multiple answers, and they're not necessarily wrong. They could do all kinds of different options that can be chosen. And so as to the question of supply and demand, there is no right answer, but it's this chicken and egg thing. Which comes first, demand or supply? And that is, do firms supply goods because people want them? That is, people are just dying to have something, or do we want things only after they're produced? Now, there are two different ways of looking at this. And most economists would say that firms that are producers on the supply side produce things because people have a demand for it. They have a need, they have a demand, so as a result, they'll produce them. It's been known for a long time there would probably be demand for electric vehicles. And at some point, we will all be driving electric vehicles. I have very little doubt about that. It may come to pass that 18-wheelers will become maybe the laggards on this because of the technology needing to catch up. We'll probably all drive electric vehicles. And so that is, there's demand for it, but there wasn't supply. Now there's supply, but it's not exactly the most, a Tesla may not be the right vehicle for everybody, price-wise, or, you know, just all kinds of other kinds of issues. And I know that's not the only vehicle out there. We'll see more of those. And that is, the demand is driving this. And so somebody's producing it because there is demand. And probably the driver. So anyway, it doesn't really make any difference. Let's take demand first. What is the definition of demand? Sort of a textbook definition is the ability and willingness of potential buyers to purchase goods. I won't say goods and services because it's really the same thing, at various prices and quantities. Okay, so there are the two interesting. Well, the phrase ability and willingness is important here, and let's talk about that. To really be on the demand side, you've got to have the ability and you've got willingness. They both have to go together. Ability and willingness, not ability or willingness, but ability and willingness. Otherwise, you're really not on the demand side. So think about this. Since we're talking about electric vehicles, and I guess Elon Musk's name comes up as the founder of Tesla, and he's also the founder of SpaceX, and I think they're doing some space tourism and whatnot. You know, there is demand for people to, there is the ability of people to afford whatever it costs to go into space right now. But there are a lot of people who aren't willing to go into space, and so they may have the ability to pay, but not the willingness to do so. Likewise, there are probably a lot of people who are willing to go into space but don't have the ability because of the extremely high costs. So obviously, there's only a limited number of people who are on the demand side for that good. Or take something that people don't consume at all. They've got the ability to demand the good, but they don't. So like cigarettes, if you don't smoke, you may have the ability to afford to buy cigarettes, but no willingness. And so that the price of cigarettes is irrelevant to you, makes no difference whatsoever. And then in fact, you're not on the demand side. So you're out of the demand. So the market does not include you if you're, so it's going to include both of those potential buyers. In fact, we would say potential buyers, not just actual buyers, but potential buyers, because some buyers would be priced in if it were a different price.
Sorry to interrupt you. It's just on the screen right now, there's an IP address and a MAC address that's taking over the screen.
I don't know how to get rid of that. Does anybody know how to get rid of that?
I don't know exactly. I just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, I see that, and somebody made a note of that. And I don't know, I've never seen that before, actually.